Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bryn Mawr Film Institute's Film Studies Online discussion of Asteroid City. I am thrilled to be joined by a longtime favorite and friend of BMFI and perhaps the biggest Wes Anderson fan I know personally, Lisa DeNight. Lisa, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Andrew?
I'm fine, and I have to say that what I'm about to say does not always apply, but your introduction to this film led me to take a warmer view of a film that I was honestly a little bit lukewarm on. So I'm really appreciative of that, as I'm sure our participants are, and I know that we'll be hitting on some of the points you touched upon as we go through the discussion. For those of you who might be new to joining us, please keep your audio on mute unless you're asking a question. You'll know to ask a question because I will call on you. And please remember to mute after you are done asking your question. There is a raise hand function within Zoom. That's the best way to let me know that you have a question to ask or a comment to make. And you can also participate in the chat if you want to introduce yourselves to us or to others, or you want to offer a link to a resource, or just have a different conversation than the one we're having because you don't care for it that much. With that, let's see if anyone has any comments to make. I think we're still waiting for people to be given their permissions. So I think that's coming online. Here they come. And when someone raises their hand, we can get to this. Lisa, in the meantime, I will talk to you about something that I was very glad to hear you say in our conversation before we came online, which was that you sometimes, even you, who is younger and sharper than I am, but also much bigger Wes Anderson fan than I am, sometimes lost your bearings a little bit with the TV show about a play and the different, moving through the different layers, the TV show layer, the history of and production of the play, and then the actual sort of story, main story itself. Do you have a sense of why, or what's your guess, I guess, as to why Anderson finds that to be compelling or productive rather than interfering with what he's trying to deal with, those key themes that you've mentioned and are definitely present in the film?
That's a really great question to kick off, Andrew. And yeah, I mean, just through my own, I probably have seen this 4 or 5 times by now, and it gets better with every viewing, I'll say that. But I feel like with most Wes Anderson films that have come out in I'd say the past 10 years, I really only start to absorb it on the second viewing because of his increasingly elaborate framework. And this, to me, was the most ambitious framework yet. And it really did take me 2-ish viewings to come around on exactly the question you posed. Like, is this just frame for frame's sake, or is it actually adding something to the equation here that is more resonant than it would have been without it? And I completely come down on the side of yes. Like the framework for me really is an elegant way of kind of taking a step back and showing just how much work and people go into the act of creation, especially artistic creation. There's I'm probably going to butcher it. There's some great Godard quote from way back when. Every film is a documentary of its actors, or, you know, every film is a documentary of its time and place and the people that created it, essentially. And I think that is precisely what Anderson is doing here with this film, giving us the kind of framework to see how something is put together, and the kind of chaos and volatility that goes into that. But we were kind of talking about this before we even started. Just the fact that there's so much framework there, and I still, when I watch it, am mesmerized into, you know, just watching a movie about what's going on in Asteroid City, the fake town. Like it's truly a marvel, and I still don't know precisely, and I don't think I ever will, how Anderson pulls off that friction between showing us all the moving parts here, and yet still I'm completely taken in by the story that we're told from the very beginning doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can see some interesting thematic connections. I mean, in this particular case, the framing devices do have to do with performance and communication and emotion and control, and those are all themes that are present in the main story of Asteroid City and are present, frankly, throughout most of Anderson's work, as you pointed out in your introduction. And so when you're talking about, as you said again in your introduction, that idea of sort of method acting and the Kazan influence on theater performance and all that in the era, which is clearly being sort of referenced, that is about depictions of emotion and, you know, how does emotion present itself effectively in storytelling and in human relationships and things like that. And even the narrator, I'm sorry, the host of the TV show, Bryan Cranston, occasionally, you know, sort of occasionally pops up and is, you know, there's at least the one moment where he says, "Oh, I'm not in this scene," or he makes a mistake, you know, within the film. And that idea that the person, the sort of omniscient narrator who is supposed to sort of by definition of being the omniscient narrator, be in charge of everything, is himself at a loss, which of course is one of the themes of Anderson's work, that, you know, you and other filmmakers, you know, go ahead and try to control everything, as Anderson tries to do with his films. It's not gonna work out that way. So I found this to be a much more cohesive use of sort of the structure that was imposed on the film than, say, The French Dispatch, which I found, I sort of conceptually, I understood why that was interesting to him, but I don't think it helped a feature film and what a feature film is trying to do. For those of you who heard me referencing Lisa's earlier remarks, Lisa made an introductory video to go along with this discussion, as all of our co-moderators do. You can find it at the Film Studies Online page on our website, where this discussion is currently streaming. But if you look sort of below where it's streaming, you can see a link to her introduction, and there's a lot of great insights there. All of our instructors do that, or co-moderators do that when we announce the new discussion. So you can watch the introduction before you see the film to sort of help prime you for your viewing, as Lisa's introduction would be extremely helpful for folks. Heck, it was helpful for me, and I'd seen the movie before. So Lisa, are you able to, I just did a lot of talking there and I'm sorry, are you able to look in the chat and have any feedback on Lisa Marie's point or comment?
I still don't know what this is all about. Yeah, thank you, Lisa Marie, for your comments. I'm glad you found it a very interesting film. Yeah, that, you know, I'll be curious to hear if anyone pipes up and has thoughts about whether or not some of the themes on in this film were a little too unsubtle. maybe the repetition of you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep, for one. And, what is the meaning of all this? It is kind of explicitly stated a couple times throughout. What I love about that kind of final moment where Jason Schwartzman's character completely leaves the production and just is in this moment of true crisis. He does not know what the play means, doesn't know how he's feeling about his own emotions as both an actor and the character. And Adrian Brody, as director, just says, you're not going to know, essentially, just keep telling the story. And I think that is such a beautiful theme in this film, is the kind of embrace of not knowing. That there's so many pursuits here, that there's a scientific inquiry that, if we go back to, how this film involves, the 50s world of method acting, there's the interior inquiry, how does one behave and express that as an actor. There's so much inquiry going on throughout this movie, that I just love that that's the kind of answer to that question is, sometimes you're not going to know. Most often you're not going to know, but you're just going to keep telling your story, live your life, move forward, try to find art that resonates with you, and that's that.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, frankly, the individual actor in a given role, it's not his or her job to even really know or arguably think about what it's all about. They should be thinking about their character and making the moments that the scenes and the moments their characters are going through real and genuine and sincere and as sort of impactful as they can. And I think there's obviously a message there for life too, right? Like people talk about being present, right? You're sitting at the dinner table with your family, be present. Or you're at the Grand Canyon, don't worry about getting the perfect picture, be present and look at the Grand Canyon, which is actually right in front of you. And, you don't need to think about, it's not always advantageous or healthy to think about what this all means. You'd be better off being in the moment. And so I think that's another instance where, Anderson has a lot of characters who worry about a lot of things, and the way his films are made, I would guess that he worries about a lot of things. And sometimes that's a disservice. And sometimes thinking about the bigger picture is a disservice. And I think that it's an unusual thing for a director to say, I would think. I didn't find Adrian Brody's remarks very, very directorly or constructive, but it might be good life advice. Let's see. Okay, we got our first hand up. That's great. Gene, go ahead, unmute and let us know what's on your mind.
Hi, guys. Well, Lisa's probably predicting where I'm going to go with my comments, because we've had some back and forths about it. Not nasty ones, but just trying to figure it out. I couldn't wait to listen to this because you're giving me some insights as to maybe where I should focus my attention. I've seen it almost 3 times. I couldn't finish it today because something came up, but as you're making me realize the information in this story or in this narrative is so dense that it may take several viewings to really digest it before I even decide if I like it or not. Because so far it's been the most difficult of any of Anderson's films for me to enjoy, and I love most of them. But part of me doesn't want to feel like I need to fight that hard to acknowledge that I like it. I get sometimes it's okay to just say it misses the mark for me, but the visual style, like most of his films, usually the first thing I thought of when I saw it the first time was usually it supports the narrative really well. In this case, to me, it felt like the visuals were guiding what was happening in the story, and they had to kind of fit everything into the frame versus being supported by how it's being framed. And so I don't know, as I'm watching this, you're saying, you don't always have to understand it, which is true. There's plenty of films I just love for a visual, for a visual experience or whatever. So do I just stay with that and enjoy, I love the palette of the film, or do I need to worry myself about understanding what was happening? The last thing I'll say is, where I think the visual style is working best in the present moment in his career is in this series of Roald Dahl shorts that he has. I think it's on Netflix, where it feels more novel and just complements the storytelling in a way that works perfectly. Whereas I think this is where it failed with Asteroid City. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think it's interesting. I was talking about this. Where was I talking about this? I was talking about this in another, I guess when I was teaching it last week, maybe when I was teaching at the Institute, that you talk about we talk about when plays are turned into films and how they have to be quote unquote opened up. And how a lot of times that opening up is sort of done for the sake of doing it, because people feel that the filmmakers feel they have to, because they're taking a play and making a movie out of it. I think that, even though it's easy to forget, and I certainly forget, and I was watching it, I think there's a point to making the main story that we're seeing in Asteroid City a play, which is that if it really is a play, there's certain things we accept and tolerate in plays that we might not in a film, namely that the people are sort of always together. And that's a necessary element of this. I mean, there's the quarantine that occurs as part of the story, but even within that quarantine, that they're dealing with such a confined area. And I think that works. I think that works for the film here. And so I actually found this style more related to the story than I did in something like French Dispatch, where I understand sort of rationally that it's a magazine and the segments and so on work, but I found it made more sense for the overall story and themes here.
That, can I just say, that makes sense to me. But I remember in the first viewing, since the storyline and the narrative was so layered, it was an effort just to kind of stick with that, but then having such a strong visual presence kept tearing me away from any kind of linear logic I had. That may have been where it troubled me most.
I mean, Jean, I appreciate those comments. I know we've talked about this already, but isn't that maybe kind of the point, that it disrupts your linear logic? I mean, to me, the perfect scene in this film, like truly the transcendental moment, is actually not in the beautiful pastel widescreen cinematic extravaganza that is Asteroid City. It's the moment in the end of the film where Augie Jones Hall, however we want to describe him, Jason Schwartzman's character, leaves and then goes outside on the balcony and meets Margot Robbie. And that has heft because of the culmination of both of these types of visual and emotional registers and presences, and the conflation of the theater and film. I think there are some clear differences and dissonances between the kind of theatrical film presentation and then the true cinematic presentation that we could talk about. But to me, the most beautiful moment, the most transcendent and perfect moment of the film is not in the cinematic portion, it's in the theatrical portion. And it just bleeds those storylines together and then takes you into something that it's a a remembered scene that was cut. It doesn't even exist in the movie or play proper. But it just blends those two storylines together in a way that I feel like it does kind of shatter your linear logic in a way that allows for an emotional resonance that I still can't figure out, like why that moves me so much. It's truly the power of storytelling, and the actor way, the actor's method, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't need straight linear all the time. I love lots of films that aren't, but I think there was some frustration in feeling like I needed to gather it all and I wasn't able to. But taking everything that's said tonight into consideration, I'll definitely give it another view, and if only just to see that boy's musical performance again, which is my favorite moment. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, really, the nice thing about this movie is that if you just kind of divorce yourself from all of the intellectual kind of shimmying between your black and white and pastel color and all of the headiness of those frames, it's just fun. It's funny and it's so delightful. Like you could just sit back and watch it and be delighted by the alien or the alien song and call it a day. Like I feel in a way now that I've had this little evolution with it, I feel in a way whenever I look at a kind of dismissive review, like just enjoy it. Like just enjoy the charm of this movie, if you don't want to think about it too much, or if you find that it's not working for you on a thematic or intellectual level, at the very least it's going to work for you on a humor or visual level.
Mike had a couple of interesting comments in the chat, and I hope he'll be willing to speak to them and share them by talking to us with his hand. He's got his hand up to do that. Great.
Yeah, sure.
So thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I had my hand up earlier to ask about the host breaking out of the frame at that one moment that you mentioned already, but I too appreciated your introduction, Lisa, because I saw the film this summer on the big screen, and with my son, who came away with it thinking it was pretty nihilistic. He took the "don't think about it, just do it" as a kind of on a more global sense than I had, because I think that it is an enjoyable film, and as much as you say sometimes we should just enjoy it, I think Wes Anderson is screaming out for us to think about it with some of the lines of dialogue, like you mentioned in your introduction about finding keys to the film. I think the general's comment in his speech about if you wanted to live a nice, quiet, peaceful life, you picked the wrong time to be born, might be one. I was trying to pay attention to the idea of time as a theme in the film. When Augie tells his father-in-law he hasn't told the kids about their mother because the time was always wrong, and his father-in-law says his father-in-law says, I guess, the time is always wrong, to talk about death or to break the news of death. And then the other quote that struck me in that scene you mentioned, that even when I didn't understand it, seeing it on the big screen, I knew that scene with Margot Robbie had to be a big key to the whole thing. I think the Augie character calls her the wife who played my actress, as opposed to the actress who played my wife, which made me think maybe this is the closest we're getting to whatever what really happened kind of story is underneath all this. So those are some thoughts I had. One other thought I had was, you mentioned in your introduction about connections to other films, and two that I saw. Obviously, one is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Inside that asteroid crater looks kind of like a miniature version of the setup at Devil's Tower in Close Encounters. And also when they're all wearing the boxes over their heads, it reminded me of Scout wearing the box over her head on Halloween in To Kill a Mockingbird, and how that little frame of a window she has limits her perspective onto the adult world, and how everybody in this movie's got a limited perspective because of the frames they either can or can't break out of. So some random thoughts for you to respond to or not. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the benefits of having actors playing characters and us getting to see, you know, in the case of Jason Schwartzman's character, getting to see him sort of first encounter the character, be the character for a while, and then sort of come out the other side. It's, you know, to me, it's analogous of the fact that and this is something that I think that Anderson has hinted at in a far less direct way in some of his other movies, but it's that, you know, we all occupy different roles. You know, I am a father, I am a son, I am a husband, I am an employee, I am a supervisor to some people, I am supervised by other people. We all have these different things. And when you're dealing with things as abstract as emotions, be they the emotions in your real life or the emotions that these actors are contending with in their roles, there's going to be, or there certainly is potential for there to be some conflict among those roles. And I mean, I think you see this in other Anderson films, right? You know, there's, you know, you think of Darjeeling and you think of, or for that matter, Tenenbaums, and you think about the tension between the relationships of the siblings as siblings, but then the siblings are also each children of the parents. And so I think that this might be a way to sort of get at the tensions of those different relationships and layers, and making it a bit more pronounced. And therefore, I think allowing more sort of extremity to it than in other films. But that's just sort of something that Mike's comments sort of made me think of. Lisa.
Yeah, Mike, I really appreciate those comments. You made me think of a lot of things I could say in response. And just one thing to start off, I think you said your son found it nihilistic, and I also think that this is one of the most bleak and truly kind of upsetting films that Anderson has made, even though I just talked a big game about how fun it is and charming. Like, I think that's another you know, amazing dichotomy here, is that and another reason why we have, you know, the framework to more fully set us back in the 50s as a comment for, you know, what was going on culturally in the 50s. You know, there's, again, all of this, you know, excitement in terms of scientific inquiry, but then you have the atom bomb. So there's, you know, you're looking to the skies for, you know, the next discovery, but science could also lead to the end of the world. You know, there's that real tension there that's going on in, you know, the 50s and, you know, in this movie. And I think especially, you know, that scene that I kind of obliquely referenced at the end, where all of the actors are kind of coming together in that studio setting with the repetition of, you know, you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. That scene directly follows the announcement, if you will, to us, the viewers, that the screenwriter died in a horrific car accident. So while that theme is quite optimistic in some respects, having it come after that discovery of death and how eerie that scene really is, it's, you know, the fall asleep is, you know, maybe the forever sleep. You know, there's something quite eerie about some of even the most joyous moments in this film, or the most you know, powerful moments. And I really feel that too. And sometimes it takes a conversation like this to kind of get back to how there is such an undercurrent of grief and unease and uncertainty in this film, and really in Anderson's work overall, that does come through if you spend time with it both in and outside of the film.
And the setting and the sort of the genre references, that all makes sense for that nihilistic, element. I mean, that's a very perceptive and in some ways, I guess I hadn't thought of it, but understandable reaction to the film. I mean, there is, it's after World War II, basically, that nihilism enters Hollywood films with any consistency. And you see it primarily in two genres. You see it in film noir, and you see it in the science fiction of the era, about whether it's monsters from outer space or it's some analog of the fear of nuclear destruction, or the Body Snatchers or The Thing or what have you. And so I think that line that Mike referenced, that Jeffrey Wright's character says, if you wanted to live a nice, quiet, peaceful life, you picked the wrong time to be born. I think that's I think in a way it's funny, because part of the style of the film is the aesthetic of the film is pushing us towards a comforting nostalgia of that sort of imaginary 1950s. But of course, it wasn't all that wonderful and comfortable, and certainly wasn't for everybody. And in that regard, it's a reminder that, the way things are in the world today, don't think everything was better earlier, because there's no time in which you'd be born, I guess is the point, when it will be automatically a nice, quiet, peaceful life. There's always something going on. There's always things that people have to deal with. There's never a good time to tell your children what happened to their mother. And so, it's interesting to have this sort of message of perpetual discomfort wrapped in what in many ways is a sunny and warm and comforting aesthetic.
Could I add one more thing, Andrew, to
Please.
what Mike's comments made me think about? Mike had mentioned something about how the frames within frames worked for him, and that is one element that I started to absorb on maybe the second viewing, is just how elegant the frames within frames as a visual motif was in this film. Which again kind of made that last scene with Margot Robbie so impactful to me, because within Asteroid City you have Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson's characters talking to each other, and the frame that they're in is just so spectacular. This like perfect square with a wide cinema scope. And then of course there's the additional frames that Mike mentioned, the box, Augie's photographs, and it just so vividly showcases Anderson's stylistics and how they relate to his themes. Like everyone is just kind of in their own frame, unable to break out because they're too personally controlling of their own grief or their own emotions. And I love all the frames within frames in this film and how elegant they are.
Kay has an interesting question in the chat, and I would encourage her to raise her hand if she wants to share it with us verbally, but if not, I can certainly read what she says. There you are, Kay.
Yes, I was wondering how, well, I'll read what I wrote. The cluster groups of characters, the family, the father of the grieving children, the busload of the 10 children, the cowboys at the gas station, the celebrity, the brainiac kids. How do these clusters of characters coalesce in the film, or don't they? Are they meant
Uh, Lisa, do you want to start or should I?
I love this question. I think it's just a nice panorama of how these groups react to, you know, their world being turned upside down. And also one thing that we haven't talked about yet is just how wonderful throughout Anderson's career is his exploration of children or adolescents are. And so I love that we're kind of parceled off throughout the film with these various groups, especially the children, because that opens up a lot more, you know, connections to Anderson's previous work, but also this kind of thought that, you know, that these teens are really, you know, the most optimistic you know, moment in someone's life, and perhaps the most equipped to deal with the world being turned upside down on them, because they're kind of in this developmental stage where everything is new and they're, you know, having to adjust their worldview on a daily basis. So I love how the film does throw everything together, but I'm curious if Andrew has thoughts on all those disparate elements coming together now.
I mean, I don't think they go together as sort of naturally or logically as, say, the, you know, when I read this thing, we're talking about a Wes Anderson film, and I read your points about disparate elements. I thought of the dinner in Rushmore after the play, when you have Max and the teacher and her date, the doctor, and you have Herman. And so you have all these different people who really don't have any business being at dinner together, but they're brought there because they all know someone else at the table who knows someone else at the table. And I think this is, I think Kay's comment or question is a bigger version of that. And that maybe the people don't necessarily all go together. Do the cowboys go together in some way with the brainiacs? No, but what I think they all have in common is they facilitate the thematic, the thematic conversations the movie wants to have about you know, people's different roles, people's different obligations to other people, the expectations we have of certain types of people based on how they're known or what they're known for or how they appear. The idea that, you know, the teacher feels a strong sense of, or an obligation to protect the kids. Get the sense that the main cowboy, played by Rupert Friend, feels something of that obligation toward the teacher. I think these things all go together sort of thematically, even if not every piece line, you know, connects to every other piece. The other thing I'll say is something I've given a lot more thought to since Lisa's introduction is the notion that Anderson really is thinking about film and theater of that era. And the 50s were a huge era for Westerns. And so if we're going to have the science fiction element, we're going to have the sort of method acting element. We're going to have, this is interesting, the Scarlett Johansson character. I think it's because of her hair. I sort of always want to think of her as a Janet Leigh character, but maybe she's more of a Gloria Graham character. And based on the dialogue she's been reading and the parts she's been in, I mean, she could be someone who's been in sort of late period noirs. So the cowboys being there sort of fills in that piece, you know, in that regard. So, you know, I don't think everything fits together, but I mean, in disaster movies, it's very, very common to have people thrown together who wouldn't normally otherwise be together. In fact, that's one of the interesting dynamics created in those movies. And one of the elements of this film is that disaster component within Asteroid City. Let's see. Mike had another comment about distance and the use of the width of the screen when there is a widescreen. Yeah, I mean, you probably have some additional thoughts on this, Lisa, but I think the, composition is a huge tool in Anderson's toolbox, and something that he obviously gives an extraordinary amount of thought to. And so I think of this as an element of that.
I agree. I also think it does bring back the conversation between stylistic differences between the the world of Asteroid City and the world of the theatrical framing device. And while there is distance in Asteroid City, there are also so many more close-ups. And within the theatrical world, everything is kept at a distance. And I think this is kind of purposeful to showcase the differences between the kind of stage-bound theater and cinema, which can just wrap you up in consciousness. But in some cases, the theatrical distance was almost a little annoying to me. Like I couldn't even tell like who was actually speaking in the studio sometimes, because they were just at such a distance away. But I think that to Andrew's point, certainly the composition and symmetry of Anderson's work is a big recurring visual motif here. But I also like how it's kind of upturned in some slight ways after the aliens' first appearance. The film. I'm not going to suggest that it becomes destabilized or Anderson's perfectly composed vision becomes muddy or anything. But I think of the scene where the general kind of rescinds the freedom to leave after the alien comes back, and then the whole scene just kind of like explodes and there's no real symmetry. I mean, maybe it's as messy as Anderson has ever gotten. And so I like that, there is clearly the devotion to his style and the, orderliness that it entails when characters are trying to keep bottled emotions inside and not have them spill out. But I also like how that does kind of translate through to moments where that is broken in the film as well.
Yeah, and if the thing I've been harping on inadvertently this whole discussion is that notion of the references to the movies of the 50s, and of course, what is the film industry doing in the 1950s because of competition for television? One thing we haven't talked about is the difference between color and black and white. That's one thing film is doing. It does more color, starts doing more color as television emerges. The other thing it does is it begins the widescreen formats. Begins sort of significant use of those in the mid 1950s. So, the way to sort of remind us of that, demonstrate that, is with those people on. I mean, there's plenty of other compositions that do it, but having the people on opposite ends of the frame does it as well. And so, if we believe or we think, perhaps as I seem to, and as I said, sort of without realizing it, coming to understand that Wes Anderson's a little more interested in movies from the past than I realized, that could be part of it as well. Are there any other questions or comments? Let's see.
Oh, the car chase scene.
Geez. Lisa, any thoughts on that?
I have a couple thoughts. And it doesn't just bookend the car chase between the cops and the bad guys. I think there are a couple instances throughout the film. On one hand, we've been talking about this kind of dissonance between the charm and frivolity, and then the kind of true upsetting existentialism underneath. I mean, I think that could be applied here. I mean, it's a fun little gag that recurs, but it's also a dangerous situation of crime and process. I think it's also it comes down more heavily on one side of that equation than the other. I think it's a fun recurring motif that kind of sets you in the lawless American West as well. I mean, I kind of loop it in with the Roadrunner appearing a couple times to say, meet me, it's a way to just kind of anchor you in that mythological West. That's my take on the car chase. Perhaps Andrew has any additional thoughts, or is that a good enough take?
No, I really don't have, for some reason, to me, it seemed, I don't know why, I can't explain it. It just seemed like a very Coen Brothers thing to have, and I'm not sure why. But to me, it seemed sort of like, again, sort of like out of place. And you mentioned this earlier with that sort of after the quarantine is lifted or whatever, the sort of a bit of chaos into the world of the film, that for a filmmaker, that is the last person who would tend to allow or even really depict it. And so it's sort of like maybe a reminder that there's a world outside of Asteroid City. Although I'm not sure that, I would never guess that he would think that really matters, that we remember that.
Andrew, can I, this is tangential, but you saying that for some reason kind of sparked something in my mind. I'll ask you, and if anyone wants to chime in, the three witches, Augie's young daughters, to me, that was like more of an element of chaos in a Wes Anderson film than I feel like I've seen maybe since The Darjeeling Limited. Like they were not, yes, I mean they're still a part of the Andersonian style and fabric, but they were so unpredictable and funny, and just, to me, that there was a little bit of chaos there. Maybe I'm completely reading into it, but I just liked how their interaction with each other and with the world, and of course we didn't see them in the framing device. We saw Midge Campbell's daughter, the actress playing her, but we didn't see these three little girls. And so I loved them, and they were just this injection of chaos that I was not necessarily expecting in a Wes Anderson movie. And they also provided me my biggest laughs of the film. So I'll just add that.
No, I think you're right. I mean, they are an element of chaos. They don't, you expect them to sort of be a unit, but then each one answers the same question differently. You expect them to do exactly what their grandfather tells them, but of course they don't. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's funny. We know my son has a friend who has two younger sisters who sort of remind me of those girls, and they are far more energetic. But I have to remember, these are Wes Anderson little girls, so they can't be, truly as almost maniacal as some truly are. But they're definitely, they stand apart. They stand apart from the others. They certainly stand apart from their brother and their dad. That's for sure. Kay had another comment, and if she would care to share it verbally, please go ahead, Kay.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the little girls first.
Sure.
They were little witches, and and very unchristian, and not Episcopalian like the grandfather, and they are just not 50s good little girls. They are precursors of the Exorcist girl. I mean, there's something demonic in the little girls, which works as counterpoint to what you expect of 50s little girls in pretty dresses. But what I liked is the foreshadowing of the doodad. I don't know what it was. It falls off the car, that blows up the car, and it relegates the station wagon to desert junk. It goes into the graveyard of other cars, which increases during the film. I've only seen it once, but I think you later see bunch of piled up of junk cars. Looks like near the Philadelphia airport, just piles of junk cars. But and then that forecast, when what happens later when that same or similar doodad blows up everything, and and I think that relates to kind of the doomsday cults of the 50s. And I really liked that. It gave a certain unity of a little throwaway object in the beginning that comes back and is important later.
That's a really great point, because watching the movie again recently, I saw that piece that comes off and startles Matt Dillon as the mechanic, and he just doesn't know what to make of it. It sort of seems to be ridiculously animated and almost lifelike. And I thought of that as being like what a car part looks like in Wes Anderson's mind. But you're absolutely right that it is, I think there's definitely a bit of foreshadowing or link to, it came from outer space and that sort of thing. And that it is alive and that it is foreshadowing, because he's so certain it's going to be one of these two things. And then he says, I've never seen that before. And, like everyone else in Wes Anderson, every other professional person in Wes Anderson's world, this is a mechanic who's seen it all. So how could he have never seen that before? So I think that's a really good point. And it's another connection to that sort of that 50s culture on both on screen and off.
And as far as the palette's concerned, as I was watching it, I decided to give it a name, and I call it the Levittown palette, because that is the palette that all the old Levittown houses had, the pale pinks and greens and kind of that faded, and it's been revived lately by Williams Sonoma and Target, pink and green toasters, sort of a faded palette. And if you go to Levittown houses, either here in Pennsylvania, Levittown, or the ones on Long Island, that was the original palette of exactly what they look like. And cars also came in those colors, very pale.
Yeah, those are very mid-century colors.
Yeah, and if you ever go to Cuba, you'll see them all down there, the cars right in that color.
Hey, and Andrew, I'll share just quickly, since Kay, you brought it up, the palette. I had a little moment of minor artistic connection and discovery. About 2 weeks ago, I was out in Fort Worth, Texas, and I went to the Amon Carter Museum of Western Art, or American art, but primarily focused in the West. And I am a big fan of Friedrich Remington, but mostly the sculptures. So I think he was most active at the turn of when the 1800s turned to the 1900s. Western painter, sculptor. And there were some paintings that this museum had that I tried to Google extensively, Asteroid City, Friedrich Remington. I swear that Anderson must have seen these and they informed his color palette. But it was just a little moment of fun discovery for me because, Remington was so instrumental in kind of shaping the iconography of the American West, and I guess that includes its color palette. So while I think often, when I'm watching this movie of films like Bad Day at Black Rock, or other 50s movies that have a color palette that are well suited to the desert, now I have a new artistic influence to kind of chew on.
Well, and the playwright, Edward Norton's playwright, has some Western paintings on the wall of his studio, although I think one of them has a naked cowboy, and I'm guessing Remington didn't do any of those.
Not that I know of.
But yeah, so there's
horses.
Right, yeah, naked horses, right. So there probably is some connection there. That's an interesting point. Thanks everybody for your comments. It looks like we've sort of wrapped things up. I won't ever say that we've figured out the film, but I think maybe we've all gotten a little closer to that, or at least some different and new appreciations of it. So we really appreciate that you all joined us. Of course, it's wonderful to see you all online, but we would love to see you in the theater as well. We've got a lot of film education coming up, as you can see on your screen, including tomorrow night, a Cinema Classic seminar on a wonderful film, Brief Encounter, one of the best British films of all time, and a very interesting film by David Lean, who is not known for the intimate sort of dramas that film certainly is, and obviously a host of other things coming up in the coming weeks and months on the education front. We love to see you there. And of course, we have a lot of films showing as well. We've got some that are actually a number that are ending this week, and a few more, including some concert or music related films, I should say, a documentary about Joan Baez, and concert film, someone only perhaps slightly more popular, Taylor Swift. And we're very happy to say we're going to have Killers of the Flower Moon, the new Martin Scorsese film about a horrible incident that actually happened involving the Osage Nation last century. Happening, that's coming this Friday. We're gonna open it with everyone else. So if you're gonna go see it, and I suspect many of you are, hopefully you'll come see it at Bryn Mawr Film Institute. And maybe I'll see you there doing that, or at one of our upcoming courses. And in the meantime, thanks very much for joining us. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts. It always improves my own opinion and appreciation of the movie to hear everyone's thoughts on this film.
And if you like what we're doing, whether it's tonight or the last time you're at the theater, we'd always appreciate your support. We are your nonprofit local community theater, and any way you are able to help us, we always greatly appreciate, and it helps us be able to keep doing what we're doing, whether it's showing new movies or having discussions about recent ones or on-site courses about older ones. We appreciate it, your membership, your patronage, and we look forward to seeing you soon at the movies. Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.